Okay, folks, take 15, experiencing three dimensions. Okay, so how do we experience these three dimensions? Well, we can see what two dimensions look like. On the right-hand side, you've got a computer-generated image of some kind of action hero. I can hear you all screaming at me, "Oh, that's so-and-so." Whoever it is, you can see his sculpted muscles, and you get a real sense of his energy from all that radiation going out from his back foot. Pretty effective, but it's still just two dimensions. On the left-hand side, we've got a sculpture of David. And because in our culture we are so used to seeing photographic images, we know that that's a real thing. And if we were in the room with that sculpture, we could walk up to it, kind of sense the scale of the thing. Is it human size? Is it a little bit smaller? We might be able to touch it if we go past the guards and feel the cool marble stone. We can see that from the reflection that the surface of it is very smooth. If we walked around it, we could get almost infinite views of the volumes, the mass, the silhouette, the negative space, the way the light catches all the angles. So a very different way to experience something in the round rather than on the flat surface. Okay, so what are those dimensions? We've got height. You can see my wonderful drawing there, up and down. We've got the width from side to side, and the depth. How far away is it from the front of the piece or the object to the back of it? This is actually a funny little picture. It's a real tower in the Middle East. It's probably well over 100 feet tall. I would say between 100 and 150 feet tall. But because of it almost just looks like it's a poster or something. But it is a real thing. And if we were there, we would know it. Okay, there again, something a little bit more to our scale. This is a less than human scale nude, reclining nude. There again, you see the height, the width, and the depth, how far back it is from the front to the back. Okay, so here's another experience. To me, architecture is sort of the ultimate 3D experience. You walk up to it, you look up, you look down, you look across, you can walk around it. It might take you a long time to walk around it. You can walk inside of it. In this case, here's two views of this colossal hotel. It's one of them, the one on the left is, if you were on the beach, kind of, I don't know if you guys can see my little arrow here, but on the right-hand side, you can see there's a hotel behind this big tall one. If you were on the beach there looking out, that's the view you would get. And you kind of get a sense on the one on the left that it has a Teflon coating so that at sunset, apparently the reflection of the light is amazing, that just glows and kind of makes the thing radiate light. The left-hand side one, you can see over on the left-hand side there is a road going over to that little man-made island there. It's built on like 120-foot pilings that stake it down under the seafloor there. Pretty amazing. The whole thing is 600 feet tall. It's 60 stories high. Oh, and there's a few other surprises. So let's go inside for a second. So if you decided that you wanted to eat dinner in the tallest restaurant in the world, you would go up above that 60th floor there, and you would be able to look down. This is looking down towards the lobby through all those floors. Pretty impressive. Or you might decide to have your lunch under the water. So you can go down to the lobby, you can take a little submarine that will take you down to the underwater restaurant, where you can see on the right-hand side there, you can watch the sea life swimming by you as you eat your cioppino or whatever you're having. But all of those last four images are of the same place, sort of like our memories. Every one of us thinks back to some place we've seen with just a little bit different vantage point, a little bit different view, a little bit different how some things are important and some things aren't. And there again, this though is just a photograph. And so what are some of those problems with photographs? Which is sort of to say, what's the problem with having a class where you're trying to teach about real objects, 3D objects, and we are looking at our computer screens? So there are a few issues that we have to think about. First off, there is just a point of view, right? So you can see in this image, on the right-hand side is this very energetic figure moving through space. This is kind of the modernist era. It's cast bronze. You get a real sense of the power, I mean, the muscles on this thing. The image on the left part is the same piece. And you might have figured that out. I mean, you know, it's the same height. It's the same material. You start getting these very angular and then sort of wispy looking trailing planes that move off of it. But it's a real different piece, the one on the left to the one on the right. So that can be an issue in a book or on this screen. What are you seeing? Who's putting up the view that you are going to remember this piece by? Here's another example. This is the Guggenheim Museum in New York City. Looking at this iconic architecture, just a wonderful thing done by Frank Lloyd Wright. You don't get a sense that across the street from it is the Central Park in New York City, which makes it even more wonderful. You also don't get an idea about, see that up in the upper left-hand side, there's that gridded slab of concrete that goes up. That actually is also part of the museum. You can see there's some elements on the left that imitate different elements on the old piece, but you wouldn't get a sense of that whole thing, that weird big modern block next to this really interesting circular, not particularly average looking building. But here's another picture of the Guggenheim Museum. This is from the inside. So this is another one of those problems. Cool picture, but it has a real sense of flattening out. We can't really tell how tall this thing is. It just makes a really nice image for me. But it is a little confusing if you would say, oh, that's 50 feet tall, that's 80 feet tall, it's 20 feet tall. Here's a nice fuzzy image also of the Guggenheim Museum. Just a whole other different view. You see about 5 of the 7 stories that this thing has. So sometimes it's just the photographer's interpretation, right? I mean, what is the, if you only have one image to put forward, what is the iconic image? What is the most important view? And it might just be the photographer's favorite view. In this case, this is a great example. The image on the left is the one that you will see for the most part in a textbook. Brancusi is a very famous sculptor from the era when abstraction was just starting to take hold. And it's a beautiful, graceful piece. Let's see, Birds in Space is the title. I'm looking at it. Well, maybe it's it's sleek like a bird. Maybe it really looks like a feather, which makes me think about flight. But if you look at the piece on the left, or the image on the left, you can see the piece in there, in the center of that. But there's this is actually the way that Brancusi wanted the piece to be seen. This is what he felt the piece was about. He put it in a dark room, either flashed a camera flash or a flash of light somehow, that was just the way that if you were standing outside and a hawk came whizzing by your head, or sometimes when hummingbirds come zipping by you, that's how he wanted you to feel about it. Bird in space. And it's just that instantaneous rush and energy. And that's how he wanted this piece to be thought about and remembered. There's also some confusion with scale sometimes in photographs. When we look at this, you can see in the middle here, there's like a little pueblo. It's actually in miniature. The bricks on the tiny pueblo are only a ½ inch long. And this guy in the 70s would go around New York City and find these dilapidated brick walls that mimicked what the real Pueblo buildings, many of them were the setting that they were in. And he'd construct these things. Of course, with time, the neighborhood kids would come by and destroy it, or the hail would come down and hit the thing and melt it away. But that was all right. It was sort of an installation, which is a temporary thing. Anyway, he made this, and it actually looks pretty realistic. But this is, in reality, this isn't the site of that particular piece, but in the center there is a place where there's another one of his little pueblos that he constructed. As I say, they were all over town. This is the real Pueblo, a real Pueblo village. And if you're familiar with the American Southwest, you would know that there are these huge limestone caverns that are around the mesas or in the mesas. And this piece, which looks so much like that artist's little rendering, is actually acres large. And the bricks are actually big stone chunks. So, little problem with photography. We don't really know the scale. But most of the time, or oftentimes if it's in a book, it will be written what the size of it is. So here we've got a picture. It looks like a very elaborate vase. Well, in fact, this thing is over 13 feet tall. It's bronze. It's encrusted with little angels and vines. It's really quite a fabulous piece to see. But if you just saw the picture of it, you'd think, oh, sure, I'll get some flowers and that'll be that. Sometimes photographs, though, are what is left of the piece of work, or they are the piece of work. In this case, the lightning field is acreage out in New Mexico. I forget how many of these, they're 400 stainless steel rods that are 20 feet tall that stick out of the ground. This one's pretty permanent. People call it an installation, and installations usually are temporary, but this one is to stay there. And if you went, this is a place in the United States that has the most electrical storm activity in the country. And so when that happens, the lightning comes down and channels off to, a variety of those poles. And I guess it's pretty spectacular. Probably a little bit, you'd feel a little bit terrified too. I know I would, but on the other hand, it looks pretty cool. So anyway, the safe way for us to see this and always be able to see what it looks like, even if it's a bright sunny day, is the photograph. So here is one photograph of one storm, 1 second of one storm. Here's another one, and this is from a really interesting artist, Andy Goldsworthy, whose work we'll be looking at a little later on. He lives in Scotland and has a lot of acreage. He goes out on his acreage, or wherever else in the world he is asked to come at this point. He takes what's around him. He only uses what is there on the site. And don't ask me how he made this spiraling icicle. But he set the whole thing up, made that spiral happen, got up really early one morning before the sun came up, set his camera up, waited for the exact moment when the light would hit that spiral, make it glow, take a picture, and then as the day goes on, the piece melts and it's all over with, like nothing ever happened. So how can an artist make a living like that? Well, he takes these wonderful photographs, puts them in big, beautiful coffee table books. People like me buy them, or there's some at the Columbia Library. They're all over the place. And so it's just a recording of his artistic work out in nature. Now we're going to leave the photographs behind, or problems with photography, a little bit. Through the wonders of photography, here we are way down in the bowels of a cave in France. These are 2 bison, a cow bison on the left and male bison on the right. Way deep down inside, somebody went over to the corner of this cave, grabbed some clay, globbed it onto these rocks here, and formed these wonderful images of bison. Probably, people conjecture that they are made for some kind of fertility goddess or whatever, hence the mom and dad bison there. But for whatever reason, magical, wonderful, they are also what we would call a relief form of sculpture. Relief meaning that they are attached to a surface. They either come out of a surface or are carved down into a surface. Let's look at the next one. So this one is a piece of stone from India, and you can see that they chiseled down through the stone. The other one was additive, where they were adding clay on top of a surface. This one is subtractive, where they are taking material away and carving down and fleshing out these wonderful elephants. You get a real sense of their kind of weight and volume. Really terrific. Also, I love the little shredded leaves and things that contrast with the bulk and mass of those big mammals. Here's another piece of relief work. I think this is in a door I think it's in a hospital door. And anyway, the guy that is pictured there is the architect of this hospital somewhere on the East Coast. The thing that I really am drawn to about this piece is that they put it in this really structured, straight, geometric square on the surface of this. And then they crunch this guy, the architect, into that tiny square, except every now and then they kind of say, oh, all right, let's let him have his elbow peek out over on the side there, or those owl feet, let's have those drop down, and the wing and the top notch here. Just really sort of humorous in this rather serious looking image of the architect at work. Here's some more relief work, a little bit more raised. Those leaves are really coming out from real branches on this gravestone. Then you see lower, more bas relief down below. Here is more higher relief. The Madonna and Child are almost completely formed in the round, three-dimensional, but they're attached to a background. This is ceramic, it's porcelain. So that's even more, a little bit higher relief. Some Mayan relief, they're again carving down. This one, I would say we're starting to get on really high relief. The center part of this piece is a cast bronze mural sort of men and women kind of fighting, and they're all angsty and weirded out. This is called Corporate Wars. It makes me think maybe what, Wall Street is like or something. And here are on the sides, this is where things get really off the wall, so to speak, really high relief. We've got these molded plastic geometric forms jutting out from a base that is hooked to the wall. I assume those are big skyscrapers. So you get a whole sense of skyscrapers, ominous monoliths, and maybe what's going on inside. Not a pretty picture. Some reliefs are made just with actual objects that we can recognize, like I can see some chair parts there. I can see a paddle, maybe a frame. And then there are more found objects. This was also became a very popular thing for artists to do, to instead of making things, kind of a counter movement against all the industrialization and manufacturing is going full speed ahead. And Louise Nevelson, who I have quite a few pieces on this first lecture, she was living in New York City and would wander around the more industrial parts of Manhattan and find all these old wooden forms that were used in manufacturing. And every night, after the factory would close down, they would get rid of pieces that were old or broken or couldn't be particularly used anymore. She would go around, gather these up, take them back to her studio, and construct these little boxes within boxes within boxes, and make a very formal composition, just using values, the lightness and darkness, the way the light hits the wood, often painted just in one color, either black or white or gray, mostly. They're really very beautiful pieces. They're very curious. You kind of want to peek in every one, and at some points they just become abstract, and then sometimes you move back and go, gee, I wonder what that looks familiar. I wonder what that was used to make. Here's another one of hers. This one painted in gold. It's an American tribute to the British people. This one is a little bit different. It's still there, coming out from a wall, built up from the wall. So it's kind of a relief, but you can see on the sides here, and in the front, it starts to poke out a little bit more on the ground. I mean, it starts to project out onto the floor. And this is sometimes referred to as frontal work. You don't hear that term too often, but I thought I'd throw it in for you. So frontal work. Sounds like something at a dentist. Okay, here's another piece of frontal work, as in this piece. If they pulled it out from the wall, it could be a walk around, fully in the round piece. But this is usually displayed, pushed back against a wall. The artist, the Kienholz, just wanted you to look at it from the front. So we call it a frontal piece. It's History as a Planter. This one's kind of interesting. They would often do very political pieces. They're Jewish. They set this piece, the main part of this piece is within a gas metal oven with these doors that clamp shut. Inside are mannequin feet, bare mannequin feet, kind of crammed in there. On top of here is a planter with a plant that's called a wandering Jew. Up on top of that, a little decoration there, is a musical instrument called a Jew's harp. And behind that is a framed page from a newspaper that is referring to something going on in World War II. So you look at that and you kind of take little messages from all of those parts and put it together, and you get your own feeling about the Holocaust or whatever else it brings to mind for you. More frontal work. Jewelry is often seen as frontal work, and you can see why. It lays on somebody's chest for the most part, or on their clip to their ear, or on their finger, or whatever. But in this case, these big, fabulous sculpted necklaces. And here's Louise Nevelson, the artist herself. And you see her wonderfully elaborate, oh gosh, it's huge, around her shoulders. She was always dressed like this. She always, when you see pictures and you see somebody with, like, 3/4 of an inch of black eyeshadow, it's usually Louise Nevelson. And over here is a more contemporary version. It looks like an architecture student's fantasy. Now, frontal piece, you don't come up and try and walk around and see the back if you don't want to get slapped. Okay, work, full round work, pieces in the round. Okay, they're usually out in the middle of a floor, often on a pedestal or a plinth. These lower bases here are called plinth. That's another word you might look up. Louise Nevelson again. So we've got two different kinds of things here. We've got bas-reliefs, maybe even something we might call frontal work, and then these full round pieces. Here's another work at full round, and they're wonderful to see at a museum. This is by Deborah Butterfield, and she usually makes horses, many kinds of horses with found objects. This one has corrugated metal. They're usually about life horse size, and oftentimes not on a plinth or anything. They're just out in the middle of a museum floor, or if they're cast in bronze, which often the ones that are made of beech driftwood are cast in bronze, and they're often outside. I've even seen them on different college campuses, but they're really wonderful to see. Here's more pieces in the round, and on these you could walk through this gallery space, walk around these really neat raw wood. You get a real sense of the making of these things, that they were handmade and maybe kind of crude tools. And sometimes here again, they are put on these plinths or bases or pedestals. if they don't want you to trip over them, if they don't want you to touch them or get too close to them. In this case, they can amass a number of these on one space and kind of make it a little bit cleaner view. Martin Prieur is a really interesting guy, and we'll be looking at more of his work throughout the semester. A young African-American man who, after college, decided to join the Peace Corps. So he went off to Sierra Leone in Africa and taught English and French and art and some other things, but became really involved with the woodworkers there and saw how they use traditional tools on traditional materials and the textures. He was very intrigued. He then went off to Sweden to work, teaching, I believe. But when he was there, then he also decided to apprentice with some furniture makers. And he got more and more into fine woodworking. And came back to the United States, got his master's at Yale, and now you will see his work in many, many museums, but it still retains that sort of sense of primitive handmade wooden objects that he first fell in love with in Africa. Okay, then we have something called walk-through work. And you can't get much more walk-through than pacing down some spiral staircase. In this case, in the big Sagrada Familia Cathedral in Barcelona, Spain. You really feel like you're part of the piece. More walk-through. I've seen other installations of these Nancy Graves camels where there'll be even more camels out there, and you walk through like you're walking through a pack or a herd of camels. In this case, we just have a skeleton of a camel over here with these guys, the two different kinds of camels. Another staircase that really looks like some strange abstract sculpture in itself, a little scary to walk up, I would think. I'm sure it's very sturdy or pretty sturdy, but you've got the option of going up one way or the other, or maybe there's a entrance and then an exit way. I'm not really sure, but pretty cool piece. Here's another walk-through piece, and this is also an installation. Here again, an installation is often site-specific, meaning it was conceived to be installed in a specific place. In this case, with this chain link fence reminiscent of prisons and, ironically, elementary school playgrounds, he made this maze, this labyrinth. And labyrinths usually, there are twists and turns, and you're not sure if you can get in and get out. It's often very aggravating. Especially here, you could look through and you could see through, but you would just see layers and layers and layers of this chain link, and it would be very confusing. And when I look at this, I think, well, site specific in this prison, probably only there. Oftentimes installations are only installed for a short period of time. But I liken this to what it must be to be in the legal system for a crime, getting in, getting out, trying to get in, trying to get out. Lawyers and judges and just on and on and on. Here's another Robert Morris labyrinth, and this one has a totally different feel. But I'm looking at this photograph and I'm thinking the scale on this is so strange. It just looks to me like one of those funny little kid marble games. But in fact, the walls of this piece are 8 feet tall. So when you're in there, it's a little bit intimidating just because of that. And you can see, I'm sure the way that he has the lighting, there's lots of dark areas. You probably can't even really see your feet if the light is from a side there. The other thing about this one is that the passageways are only 18 inches wide. So you'd be really cramped. I mean, if you had claustrophobia, you would not want to go in here. And I guess we've all felt that no escape, cramped, frustrated, terrifying experience, not just within an artwork, but in other aspects of our lives. Maybe it's just getting into college or passing a class or getting through this pandemic or trying to find a job or trying to find a place to live. You fill in the space there, but this piece that you know this, the feeling of it, like there's no end to it. Louise Nevelson again, here in Louise Nevelson Plaza, which is in her town, New York City. Kind of a crummy photo here, but it's a little tiny park, a little tiny plaza in the middle of all of these tall skyscrapers. At the far end there, you can see there are figurative pieces. There's the biggest one here. It looks like he or she is holding a spear or a lance or just a stick of some kind, a pole. I don't really know. Maybe it's a conductor, because these over here, there's 3 different pieces on the right that are also figures. I'm just looking at this swirling thing that comes out from one of them, like maybe it's a musical instrument or something. But anyway, this person up in the front looks like the leader, and all of these 4 other pieces that we can see here are looking down at that front person, looking like that's the person in charge, and they are waiting for instructions. And this one you can wander through, you can wander past on a sidewalk or drive by or bike by. This one you can also sit down on the benches here and have lunch with these things. Okay, the last image here, just one I threw in, and I believe is you need to refer to answer one of your questions, one of your lecture questions. And so take a look at this, kind of an interesting piece. It looks like it's all metal, maybe some plastic in there. So found objects, maybe from a thrift store, or they cleaned out their yard or garage or whatever. But what type of 3D forms are these? We just talked about 4 of them, and they're listed there. So think about it, and you'll come up with the answer. So anyway, that kind of wraps that up for this lecture, and we'll see what's next. Take care.